Good morning and welcome to Conversations with Interesting People. This is a series of business-related conversations that I hope you're going to find useful. Today's conversation is on unconscious bias, something we've probably all been guilty of at one point or another, and a topic particularly relevant in this Black History Month. Speaking about it and how to deal with it is a long-time friend of mine and a coach and author on the subject, Buki Mosaku. In more than 25 years of recruiting, as you can imagine, I've met many very interesting people, few more so than Buki, who I placed in his first sales job after he walked into my recruitment agency as a young man in the 1990s. I placed him in a highly pressured business-to-business sales role in the City of London, the type of role that, frankly, most people don't last 6 months. Well, Buki did more than survive. He thrived and went on to form his own business consultancy. And to date, he's trained thousands all over the world in companies like Shell, Aviva, Aon, Morgan Stanley, BT, Goldman Sachs, and American Express. As well as his sales training business, Results Orientated Sales Academy, Buki's also the founder of Diverse City Think Tank, a consultancy on diversity and inclusion, for whom he's developed a methodology called IDU, which I'm going to ask him about shortly. So just to let you know, we'll be taking questions throughout this session, so feel free to post them up. We may take them as we go through or leave them at the end, but please do contribute. It's an interactive session. We really do want to hear from you. And it will be available at the end, this session, on the YouTube link. So we will be posting up the YouTube link for you to have a look at it later, to save it and perhaps send it on to others to whom they might find it useful. So without more of ado, Buki, let's have a chat. How are you, man? How are you feeling today?
I'm good. Health is the barometer. Health is it always was, but even more so now. And so if we're healthy, we're wealthy, and I'm loaded in that case.
Buki, I've got to say, man, I always find you very energizing since the moment we first met. So you do have without me flattering you too much, you do have an amazing energy, man, and I think you must be an amazing trainer. So have you enjoyed your career so far? You have, no doubt.
I have. Yeah. I have. You're making me blush with all those comments, John. But yeah, I love what I do, and
Well, if I remember rightly, weren't you originally? Did you work for a media agency originally? Is that when we first met? Was that?
Yeah. So originally, I was working for Sky. Right, or Sky B as it was called in those days, and it was in advertising sales. And so if you watched a Frank Bruno fight, given my age or wage, if you watched a Frank Bruno fight or a Premiership match, you would have seen an ad in there, or a series of them, and our job was to sell those ads in there, and get more business via advertising agencies like Saatchi and Saatchi, Ogilvy and Mather, and all of those. Yeah, so that was where I started.
I did a similar job, but to be fair, the role that I placed you in was on a different level, wasn't it? I mean, it was pretty tough sales in the city. I mean, and you were selling big ticket stuff, and it wasn't easy.
No. So after Sky, I went to Saatchi and Saatchi, and then I ran into you, right? And so it's John's fault. So anybody who's in sales has been at the end of my evangelization about selling, evangelizing about selling, is down to John, really. And then John got me into this consultancy selling, systems integration, development, IT change management, 2000 consultancy, all of that. And that was go get them, Tiger, and you better get them, because if you don't, you're out.
I was impressed, man. I really was. You did a great job. And then, so you ended up working for yourself after all that and forming your own consultancy. So, respect.
So, because it was a real baptism of fire in terms of from a sales perspective, and you had to learn quickly. And I was struggling, for most of it, in the embryonic stages. And then, you know, I started to read like crazy. I read as many books on sales that I could possibly read, hundreds. And suddenly I started to get really good at it. And I had a little small, you know, I started to teach people and talk about it within the office and so forth. And yeah, I became, you know, probably the top sales guy. And I took a sabbatical, did some research, went to the States, did, you know, a lot of research into different methodologies, and then just came up with our own. And then got on the phone, and there ain't nothing to it but to do it, right? So just called some companies in the city, and the next thing you know, and I just thought, start with the financial world, you know, insurance companies, fund management. That was where we started, and the rest is history.
Excellent, excellent. So, as I said in the intro, I mean, you must have trained thousands of people over the time, mustn't you, and in some top businesses as well.
Yeah, all over the world, and yeah, all about results, and you know, we have our results-oriented sales methodology, and it seems to work. You know, yeah.
So fast forwarding a bit now. So obviously, diversity and inclusion is a topic of the times, and you were inspired to start a second business as well as your sales academy, a training business particularly focused on diversity and inclusion, weren't you?
Yeah. And you know, I was always fascinated by the subject and being a recipient of the of the good and the bad. But yeah, you know, with the whole sort of George Floyd thing and the rise of the Black Lives Matter, you know, this really inspired me to really put my foot on the gas of this diversity think tank. And yeah, it's a touchy subject, and so touchy I didn't want to touch it, but you know, in the end I did, and I'm glad I did.
Well, it is a touchy subject for lots of people, and I think lots of people are really sort of think they're walking on eggshells about it, and you know, so your perspective on it, I think, is, you know, particularly valuable because you're such a positive individual, and I've always, every time I've ever talked to you about anything, you've always had a really positive spin on anything, which has been really inspiring and everything. So I thought if anyone's going to come up with something that's actually sort of practical and positive, then it's going to be you. So you know, it's going to be interesting to talk about this because you know, with yourself, because you know, I know that you know, the perspective you're going to look on it is going to be particularly valuable. You know, I mean, you've walked the walk, haven't you? I mean, you've been through British corporate life. I mean, you're 25 years of it.
Yeah.
So you must have some stories to tell, Buki, I would imagine.
Yeah. Look, you know what? I get a lot of love, I think, from you know, I've had a lot of love from British corporate life. So, you know, and it's all I know, but you know, I'm a product of this society and environment, and it's been good to me. But yeah, I do have a lot of stories, you know, and I think the whole unconscious bias thing is a very tricky thing to handle, because you know, part of it is being you know, you're when you're a victim of it, you see it happening, but there's an element of paranoia that it might be happening when it maybe isn't happening, and when you do see it and it is happening, you can't really call it out, and it's very difficult, you know. And one of the things which I found really interesting was, you know, the more I speak to women just about their experiences, I thought there were so many parallels in what women go through, because, you know, as a man, you see the world through man's eyes, and you have a man's worldview. And when women talk about things or bias towards them, unless you're a woman, that you can't really understand the nuances of it, right? And I felt that's very similar from a race perspective in terms of bias. And then I realized from ageism and all the rest, and that's why when I started to feel that I needed to say something and put my perspective on it from what I see. Hence the birth of IDU. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to come on to IDU. This is your methodology, isn't it, for dealing with unconscious bias? But before I do, I just want to get bit more background, because I've loved some of your anecdotes and stuff. I mean, well, I've loved some of them. I've been, I've been shocked by some of them. But you did relate one to me in an early conversation of, I think what you called it, Coffee Gate, didn't you? Which made me laugh.
Oh, Coffee Gate.
Yeah. Coffee Gate. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, do you want to relate that?
Yeah, well, look, in this book that I'm writing, diversity, the black and white of inclusion, right? The missing link in dealing with unconscious bias, right? What I had to, you can talk about what happens from a technical perspective and understanding from a psychological perspective. There's nothing better than just giving people real stories. So I was thinking, well, what are the stories I'm going to give?
Exactly.
Yeah. So I was thinking, what are the stories I'm going to give? And I was thinking, well, when have I been a victim of, this unconscious bias? And so I started to list down all the things. And, as I started to list them down, I got really embarrassed because some of the things that happened to me are so embarrassing. They're scandalous. Scandalous in terms of embarrassing. And so I started to call them gates, right? And so you have different, like Watergate. Watergate. So you have unsophisticated, you have party trick gate, you have Rizzler gate. You can guess what that's about. You have all these different gates, right? And one of them was Coffee Gate. One of them was Coffee Gate. And Coffee Gate is really funny. And when you do ask me about IDU, it'll make even more sense. But what happened with Coffee Gate is that I was working at this firm, and there was this guy there, and he was a funny guy. We were all relatively new in sales, so there was just general pressure going on in terms of, you need to justify your existence. You need to get a sale. So there's this internal pressure going on. And there was this guy, and he was a bit annoying. He was like a mosquito. He would annoy everyone. It wasn't a race thing. He just would annoy everyone, right? But with me, he was like, you just wanted to put him out. But with me, he had this little racial slur thing. And I used to just let it go. Anyway, one day, and he used to do this all the time. And then one day I came in, and it was a Friday. I remember it was a Friday morning. I came into the office, and it was weird because he was really nice this day. He was really being nice to everyone, and everybody was just
really nice, was it?
Yeah, because normally he's the wrong side of wind-up merchant, but this time he was cool. So he was being nice. And then he just says, Buki, do you want a drink? Do you want some tea or coffee? I said, yeah, sure, I'd love some coffee. So he goes and makes some coffee. Anyway, remember now, this is the chap that was giving me all these racial slurs and so on. Yeah. So when he comes out of the kitchen, he comes out of the kitchen whilst he's making the coffee, and he just comes out and he goes, yeah, Buki, do you like your coffee black or white? Now, because he was in the past, he used to make all these racial slurs. I just thought that was a slur. So I went, black or white? What do you mean? What are you trying to say? So he looks at me like I'm some kind of nutter. Everybody in the building's like, what's the matter with this Buki guy? Like one day he's happy, one day he's like, is he schizophrenic? What's the matter with it? Right? And so they're saying, calm down. I said, no, I'm fine. So it looked like I was crazy. And this was like a buildup of all this tension, which had built up from all the weeks of these little slurs and stuff. And then they went to the guy and he said, well, what did you say to him? What did you do to him? He said, I just asked him if he wanted some milk in his coffee, right? And so there's a bigger point there, and that is about the tension that builds up when you're not in a position to call out bias. And it creates this tension, you can't call it out, and in the end, you either flip out like a mad person, right? Or you don't say anything, and it's bad for your mental health, or you wait for a safe space or something, and then you empty your bag and you throw up all these issues that have been happening. But what sort of got the IDU methodology in play was, wouldn't it be great if you could just call it out without the defensive fragility that comes along with calling that out? Because to call that out...
And before it gets to the point where you're so wound up, it's going to get really emotional.
Sorry, say that again?
And so you can call it out before it gets to the point where you're really wound up about it, and it gets overly emotional. So if you could call it out earlier, I think that's what you're suggesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, yeah. And I think that the key with it is calling it out in the moment. How do you call it out when it happens? Yeah, when it happens. And if you can equip I wrote an article recently and I was talking about inclusion solutions. And I find that a lot of inclusion solutions, whilst they're great, they tend to either come from what I describe as guilt, or they're fair. Now, so you have guilt-based solutions and fair-based solutions, right? And I think a lot of the inclusion solutions and unconscious bias training is all about making other people aware and sensitive around what is going on, from the victim's perspective. But the problem with that, it sets up this paradigm, and this paradigm is sort of the guilty perpetrator and the hapless victim, right? So I'm the woman, or I'm the ethnic minority who tends to receive bias that people don't know that they're doing, and it makes me feel really bad. That's the kind of paradigm that it creates. And what I think, where I'm coming from, is why not equip people with the skills, with the confidence, with the interpersonal skills to deal with bias in the moment, so it doesn't become a thing. And if you can deal with it in the moment, right, in a calm way, you can call it, but you must call it out. If you can call it out in a moment, in a calm way, then suddenly it doesn't become a thing. And so IDU,
the tension doesn't build up. The tension doesn't build up, which makes it more explosive at the end, doesn't it?
Yeah. Actually, in fact, our methodology, maybe we're sort of slipping into it, so I should probably explain. Our methodology is called IDU, and IDU stands for I don't understand. And when you're on the receiving end of any form of bias, we're talking about race now, but it could be anything, right? Ageism, ableism, sexism. When you're on the receiving end of any form of bias, what you tend to feel is, I really don't understand how this person could just be so insensitive. I really don't know. How could this person who's at 1 minute nice be so wicked? Where are they coming from? Why? I just don't understand it. That's what you think. I just can't see why these guys can't get it. How could they speak to me? How could they say that to me? How could they not include me in this? That's the kind of thoughts that you have. And you're sort of calling it in. Well, instead of calling it in, what if you could call it out? Right? But you couldn't. So the question then becomes, well, how do you call it out? And the only way that you can call it out without creating what is widely now described as defensive fragility, right? That is the other person thinks, how dare you speak to say that I'm that kind of a person. The only way that you can do that is to come from a place of dispassionate developmental inquiry, or DDE. I'm a big one for the acronyms. Dispassionate developmental inquiry. And basically what you want to say to them is, I don't understand. But obviously there's different ways of saying that. But once you do that, you're coming from a place of developmental inquiry. It's the purest, it's the most unscathed, untouched place. And when you come from a place of developmental inquiry, for example, with a manager, for example, or a team leader or a director, their natural role as a leader is to develop. That's their natural role, is to coach and develop. So when you come from a place of developmental inquiry, the person rises to that. They'll say, okay, you can say, well, that glam project that you didn't include me on, I really don't understand. Just for my own development, I'd really just like to understand what was the criteria for it. Now, if I'm talking to a manager, right, the manager's going to respond to that because that's his role. He's going to say, yeah, sure, I'll tell you.
The manager's role to understand and to explain.
So then he or she's going to explain, right? He or she's going to explain, and suddenly now we're into a conversation. And then he's going to say, well, this is the reason, and this is the reason, these are the criteria. Then I might say, well, but yeah, my point is that I think I tick all those boxes. So this is where I don't have an understanding. Then they're going to explain more. And then suddenly you're in a position where the actual bias starts to call itself out. You don't even have to mention it. You don't have to say that you chose her instead of me because of it. You don't need to do that. It actually comes out in the conversation. And this is why it's so important that we equip people with the skills to deal with it, instead of draining on HR resources and everything else and having mediators come in, visiting HR every 5 minutes. I mean, I'm exaggerating a bit, but HR seems to have become, these safe spaces seems to have become the default reaction for dealing with a bias. And I don't think it needs to be. If you can just call it out in the moment, and you, with training, with practice, you can.
You know, I mean, I've experienced this to a smaller extent with with my accent. I had a guy recently said to me he was surprised that I'd managed to be a headhunter for 25 years with an accent like I've got. And he actually said that to me. He said he meant it as he thought he was complimenting me. He said, you know, you've done well to do the job you do, you know, with your accent.
Well, there you go. There you go.
You know what I mean? So there was his pretty conscious bias, I thought, you know. But you know, the amount of prejudice that's been around forever, isn't it? You know, and happily we're starting to finally confront these things, you know, to everybody's benefit, you know. Yeah. But I just want to give a bit more context here. I'll take you back a little bit. One of the things I was really heartened by that you said in an earlier conversation when we talked a little bit about this, you said that you thought for all the problems you've encountered, that you thought Britain was one of the best places to be an ethnic minority. Am I right? You did say that, didn't you? I think you said that.
No, I didn't say that. What I actually said is that this is the most inclusive place on the earth. It is, hands down. It is. There's not one of. It is. It is. Right. You know, give me the choice of. You know, I was born in St. Mary's, Paddington. Right. Give me the choice of. No disrespect to the French, but you know the Paris equivalent. You know, St. Mary's wins every time. So look, you know, I think it's, you know, you're a Scouser, right? Liverpool FC won the Premiership, right? Pains me to say that as an Arsenal supporter, but they did, right? And and they also won the Champions League, and they are the best team in the country at the moment. That's going to change, but at the moment, right? But do you think they sit on their laurels? They don't sit on their laurels, right? They think that they're paranoid, they're forensic about getting better. And I think that's how we have to be. But we shouldn't not. We should celebrate what's great about us. And that's part of the great in Great Britain. We should celebrate that. But we should use that as a platform to do better. Like using the example of Liverpool FC, you know, they let in 7 goals 2 weeks ago and four goals a week and a half before that.
Real now, Buki. Come on.
Yeah. The point, there's a higher purpose here. My point is, they're still the best. They're still the best. And I think it's sometimes, that's why I like, you know, Lloyd's, for example. Lloyd's of London have an event called the Dive In Festival. I like the name because the name is celebratory. It's about dive in, right? And it's all about inclusion. And it's a very celebratory title. And I think it's very important that when we address these inclusion issues, we don't need to beat ourselves up as a launching pad. What we need to do is just say, yeah, we're great, we are good. It's okay to say that, but we could be better. And if we start from that point, I think we're likely to be more productive in what we do. And we're less likely, by the way, to get into these guilt-driven solutions, which actually polarize people who are being biased, and they create a them and us. So I think we should celebrate what's good, but also hold ourselves accountable to a higher standard of inclusion and performance as far as these matters are concerned.
Absolutely. Well, it's very heartening to hear you say those things about what I mean is the positive element that you're coming from, and I mean your business is called results oriented, isn't it? I think you're all about getting a positive result and for everyone to work better and to achieve what we all want, which is to work better, more harmoniously. And you know, too often I think probably we beat ourselves up and are always looking at what we're doing badly. But it's good that I find it inspiring that you're looking at it in this very positive, this very positive and enabling way. So how can we get this better and to celebrate what we do well, as well as be critical about the things that we need to improve. So I think that's very positive.
Yeah, no, yeah, I concur. This doesn't have to be we don't have to constantly beat ourselves up. And I think where I keep coming back to this, the importance of equipping people with the skills to deal with bias in the moment is critical. Because when you start to equip people with the skills, it becomes less of an issue. And you also condition the perpetrator, if you like, into shifting their paradigm. And I'd like to say something else because I think it's really important. As far as unconscious bias is concerned, it's not a them and us type of situation. And if you look at it from an in the moment perspective, a lot of people may disagree with me on this one, but it's a collaborative issue. It's not unilateral. So what I mean by that is that we are both, if the perpetrator and the victim are equally responsible for the situation in terms of being part of the solution as opposed to being part of the problem. Yeah, I go even further. I think if you don't call out unconscious bias in the moment, and that's why it's important to have a how-to, right? If you don't call out unconscious bias in the moment, or reverse bias, which I'll explain in a second, you're complicit in the problem. Now that sounds hard for the recipient of unconscious bias or any form of bias, right? But if you don't call it out,
take responsibility is what you're saying, is it?
Yeah, but that sounds hard when you say it like that. But the point is, if you look at it from look at it dispassionately, and you step away from who's right or who's wrong. If you think about it, if you say something to me, which is driven by societal stereotypes which are negative, and you unconsciously do that, which is what unconscious bias is. I hear it and I don't say anything. What's going to happen? You're going to continue thinking the way that you think, and I'm going to be peeved. So you're peeved, I'm peeved. You've got a bunch of peeved artists there, and there's no progression. So what needs to happen is that when you are a perpetrator of bias towards me, I need to have a way of calling it out, right? And I'm suggesting the way of calling it out is to leverage dispassionate developmental inquiry. You need to come from a place of developmental inquiry. But the other side of it is this: if you sense that I'm feeling that you're consciously or unconsciously coming from a place of bias, and you don't call it out, then you're complicit. There's no point in you saying you leaving and going to talk to your mates or other managers and saying to those managers, yeah, some of these, I'm not saying that you would do this job, but some of these minorities, these BAME guys, they have this chip on their shoulder, right? And you have that conversation in your safe space, which is with other white middle-class people. And then I have my conversation about white middle-class people with, black middle class or BAME middle class people in the corporate world. We're just both part of the problem. So we have to call it out, and the way to call it out is tell people that you don't understand. I mean, there's various ways of saying that, but essentially you need to come from a place of dispassionate developmental inquiry. And when you come from that place, it's actually calm, it's receptive. You don't even have to mention it. It doesn't look like you have attitude. There are fringe benefits. It enhances your leadership skills. It's awesome, even though even though it's my methodology and I say myself. Right? It's actually an awesome place to come from.
You've mentioned that there's a difference here between unconscious bias, isn't there, and reverse bias that you've alluded to. So can you explain the difference there? Difference between unconscious bias and reverse bias?
Well, look, it's a kind of simplistic distinction between the two, right? Because unconscious bias is quite complex. But I think it's really important for me to say this. In everything that I speak about as far as our IDU methodology is concerned. I'm talking about day-to-day workplace interactions, because that's what I'm talking about. I know there are bigger issues out in the bigger wide world in relation to this. But, you know, on a really basic level, reverse bias is where I'm thinking that you're either consciously treating me badly because of my sex, because of my race, because I'm disabled, because of my sexual preference. And you sense that, because it is palpable in many cases, right? It's palpable. You know, people sort of go passive aggressive, right? And you know, and so if you sense that as a manager, as a leader, I think you have to call it out. But to date, nobody calls it out. Or when they do call it out, they flip out. They say, why are you having an attitude? Why have you got a chip on your shoulder? But that's not going to help anyone. That's just not going to work. The way you have to call it out is come from developmental inquiry, dispassionate developmental inquiry. So in a sense, you're going to say that you don't understand. And guess what? Here's the good news. Since you're a manager, that's the normal thing you should do anyway on other issues. So it won't look like you're making a thing of the whole bias, racial bias, sexual bias, or whatever it is, sexual preference bias, whatever it is. It won't look like you're making a thing of it. It'll just look like you're having a normal conversation. And in our webinars and in our workshops, that's what we teach people, to come from a place of this developmental inquiry, because this goes beyond the whole, oh, be aware, be sensitive to people like this, be sensitive to people like that. I mean, that's great. And that's great awareness, right? But ultimately it creates a them and us. And if you create a them and us, you're polarizing two different people, the people. You're making them like they're different. They're not different. We're all the same. And you're actually reinforcing the problem in the first place. Yeah. Does this make sense?
Of course it makes sense. And it's good to have, we all want tools to deal with situations, don't we? You know, do we not? And, you know, a lot of these situations, we haven't got those tools. We don't know what to do. And so when you don't know what to do, the best thing to do is keep quiet, isn't it? And so if you keep quiet, you feel you're not creating any more damage, but you're not actually getting to the nub of the problem either. So if you have tools, you know, a method, then, you know, obviously, you know, that's going to help us in a better form of understanding. And what I like about the idea is just getting it over with early. Don't let this develop. You know, don't let it develop into you know, described in the Coffeegate thing, where one party's getting wound up, and then it gets explosive. So, you know, be able to. It
ends up spoiling your lunch, John. It ends up spoiling your lunch, and that's the last thing you want to do, right? Yeah, because it's all downhill from. If it spoils your lunch, it all goes downhill. Yeah.
So how are you finding this? You know, when you're out in the corporate world and you're putting these ideas across. I mean, you know, what kind of reaction are you getting? I mean, are people liking this, or do people go, "Oh, I'm not sure I can do that," or?
Yeah. So look, I think you raise a good point there, and I think the biggest thing I hear is that they say, yeah, it's all very well for you to say that, but you need to be confident. You know, you need to have the confidence to do it. But that's where the training comes in. That's where the development comes in. And so it's a case of either you self-development, or you know, you get trained, you get coached into how to do this. But here's the thing: do it repetitively whenever this situation occurs, and it just becomes second nature. The problem is that people don't have tools, and so what happens is they get frustrated. And we're talking about this in a positive way, but it can get serious. You know, it can get serious. You know, it can lead to mental health problems. It can lead to people leaving jobs for no reason. You know, they take this baggage, they take it back home. I remember back in the day, I was invited to a tender, right? And all the deliberations around this tender were being done with me, right? So they knew who I was. They knew I was the founder of the business and organization. So I went to this tender anyway. So anyway, we got through to stage one. We got through stage two. And then stage three, we had to go and present and go and talk to them, right? So we did. And I thought, well, let me bring one of my associates who just happened to be a white person, right? So I thought, let me bring him. So we went there. We went to this building. We went in, you know, upbeat for this to happen. And yeah, we went in there, and you know what? There was little panel of people there. They didn't talk. They just would not. They didn't talk to me. They did not talk. They didn't look at me. In fact, the only time they looked at me was when they were asking hostile questions. But all the managerial type of questions and so on, they were asking of the colleague that I brought in there. Yet they know that I am the founder, right? Now, the reason why I was saying that is not, I don't want to make this about me, because like I said, I get a lot of love, from all the professional service industries that I deal with. So I don't want to make it about me, but I want to make a point. The point that I was making, the point I want to make there is how painful this is, because this is what happens. When you're in that situation, and in that situation, I didn't know what to say. I didn't have IDU. You just have to, you see it coming and there's nothing you can do. So you've got like crazy thoughts.
It must have really wound you up. I mean,
of course.
I mean,
of course. And yeah,
you must have been tempted. You must have been tempted to say something,
Yeah, it's like it's like you're in a straitjacket. You can't do anything, and mad thoughts are going through your mind. Oh my God, what would my parents think if they saw me in this situation? They'd be saying, tell them what time it is, and then you're frustrated. You're like, you're just going crazy, but you can't say anything, and you have to keep calm and be nice. And so, for me, it's okay because it doesn't really happen to me that much, right? If you think about it, I've worked with thousands of organizations, so clearly it doesn't happen to me that much. But here's my point: is that you can't say anything, right? So, and I remember at the time I couldn't tell the consultant because he couldn't get it either. So there's no one you can tell. So he tries.
Did he notice? You think?
I don't know, because he probably was a bit he was a bit nervy because he doesn't run the business. I run the business. They were giving him all the...
So he was getting asked questions he didn't know the answer to.
He didn't have to answer. He's like paranoid. He's like thinking, like, how do I deal with this? So the whole thing's ridiculous. Then after, you do a sort of post-mortem after the session, and I can't really tell him. Right, and then I go and see some other colleagues, some are white, some are black. So I don't want to tell them because I don't want to look like a victim. So who can you tell? The only people you can tell is your family when you get home, and then they sort of feel sorry for you, and then you're like the victim, right? And then you tell other people who look like you, who've been in the same situation, and it's all this victim thing, and it's just bad. Like, I'm a consultant; it doesn't really matter for me because ultimately I don't have to go into work the next day with the people. But there are people in organizations that have to
you don't have to worry about a promotion, because you're
no, for me, it's just like a prospect. So it's either going to move forward or backward, and so I can move on. But there are some people who have to go into work the next day and the next day and the next day and have to deal with that. And here's my point: as hard as that was, and as much as I look like the victim, right? Here's my point. Just looking at the situation dispassionately and standing aside from it. Ironically, I'm complicit. I'm complicit in that situation because I didn't say anything. See, because those people now, right, they were coming from a place of unconscious bias, so they didn't do it on purpose. They were coming from a place of unconscious bias. They're going to go along with get on with the next person for the tender, right? I'm going away and I'm going to feel really annoyed. And I'm not saying, and they don't know I'm annoyed. I'm the only one that's annoyed, and my community or my friends and family. And, we never move forward. So I have to call it out.
What would you do now? So if you had if that situation happened to you tomorrow now, how would you deal with it now? What would you say using your methodology now?
Well, I would just come from a place of development, dispassionate developmental inquiry. So I would cut in maybe as I saw them not talking to me. I'd say, look, actually, can I just ask? Look, just for my own development. Just for my own development. I noticed that you're asking Mary all the questions, but I'm actually the founder. Is there anything particular reason for that? That's it. What's the matter with that?
Well,
they might come back to me and say to me, well, actually, Buki, that's the way we like to see if your people walk your talk or something like that. And then I'll say, yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate that you want to get a feel for the consultancy and how we operate if we do walk our talk. But I feel that some of the questions that you're asking Mary, she can't possibly answer because she's not the founder of the organization, and it doesn't make sense to me that you're not asking me those questions. And then I'm telling you, they will have to respond to that. And then it will call itself out. They will actually realize, and then they'll start having the conversation with you. That's it. But most people don't do that. They get upset and they tell their mates.
And looking at it from their perspective, I mean, they've clearly got a problem there, haven't they, in their own corporate development, haven't they? I mean, if they are doing it from a place of unconscious bias, that's going to obviously be permeating through their relationships with other people in their organization, and therefore, they're not going to be making the best use of their talent, are they?
Yeah, of course. And also, I could be the best thing since sliced bread, right? But they're never going to find out, right?
No, ask you the questions.
Exactly. So, and you're right. These conversations happen internally, and it is unconscious when it happens. And like I say, it doesn't happen to me that much, but when it does happen, you remember. That's why I've got all those gates, the different tender gate, Rizzler gate, coffee gate. There's so many of them. Party trick gate, because you can't. I'm embarrassed because, like I said, and I'm not being an apologist or I've got no one to say this for. This is the most inclusive place on earth. It is. This is. Right? I get about, I've traveled, right? This is the most inclusive place on earth. So, in most cases, in fact, people think I'm being over optimistic when I say this, but I think 98% of the time, when you're on the receiving end of some kind of bias-related microaggression, it's unconscious. In fact, I was giving this story the other day. Somebody accused me of being an apologist for thoughtless comments. But here's my point. Thoughtless. That's the point. The person isn't coming from a place of rational thought, rational discernment. They're just coming from a conditioned place. And how would they know they're coming from a conditioned place if you don't call it out? But then the other side of it is true. The reverse bias side of it is true. Sometimes we can just be paranoid. Sometimes we can just be rubbish at our job. And and what you're perceiving as some degree of bias is just the guy thinking, no, you're rubbish. You're crap. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. But, you're not good at your job, right? So the manager has to call it out. Because if they don't call it out, then this person is going to think that everybody is biased towards them. And never the twain shall meet. So we have to equip people with the skills. And it's a skill. Make no bones about it. It's an interpersonal skill. You have to equip them with the skills. And you have to equip them with the rationale as to why it works, which obviously I can't do in a talk like this. It's a bit longer. But you need to put them with the rationale. They buy into it. And whenever they're confronted with this, they use it. And what happens? It's a self-correcting mechanism. The mechanism allows you to correct this issue. And it starts to dissipate bias as a problem. And it's not going to dissipate all bias completely. But let's face it. What do people talk about when they're talking about unconscious bias? They talk about, this person said that thing to me. I didn't get this opportunity. This happened. That didn't happen. And, it's one element, but it's an element which is extremely important.
Excellent. Okay. Now we're coming towards, we're not at the end, we're coming near to the end of our talk today. So if anyone wants to put a question to Buki, here's your chance. Come on, chuck some questions at him. He normally costs a lot of money. So here's your chance to get an answer for free. so take it while you can. So do ask us a question. So as we're winding up then, Buki. So I think there's a lot there. I think that's really, really positive. Firstly, I think how positive you've been about the great majority of your experiences is really good to hear, and the good intentions of so many people. And you know, for those of us that do have any kind of unconscious bias, and we all do about all kinds of things, it's, you know, if we have the tools to actually, you know, to question ourselves and to question others if we think it's a problem, then it has got to be better, hasn't it? You know, but it's all about communication, is it not? Communication and education, in short.
Yeah, I think communicate. Look, you know, there was back in the day, there was a rapper called Big Daddy Kane, right? And he had this line where he says, "Conversation, good communication only makes things better in a relation." And I think it's so true. And I think, you know, like I said, I don't want to minimize how big this issue is. You know, there are many different elements to it, but I think the crucial element, one of the key elements is communication. And I think if people can communicate more effectively, then suddenly we're in a position to handle what to date, you know, has been a really serious problem if you're on the receiving end of it. And like we've just described, being on the receiving end isn't necessarily the traditional subject or recipient. It can be the perpetrator, both in inverted commas, if it's against them. So here's one element, one way of addressing that. I mean, it's a big subject, unconscious bias, and there's lots of different perspectives, but that's one element and an important one.
Good. Well, Buki, it's been an absolute pleasure. I don't think we do have any questions, but I'll ask one more time if you do want to. Oh, here we go. There's one coming from Isabel. In situations of bias, how long did it take to build the confidence to call out such situations? Are there any specific advices for not getting caught up in the upset of "I don't understand"?
So this is a really, really good question, and please leave it on the screen, production person, Mark. Yeah, so in situations of bias, how long did it take to build the confidence to call out such situations? That is such a good question. Well, to be honest, it took me about 20 years to come up with the methodology. So this is through trial and error, this is through thinking, racking my brain. How do you deal with this, right? But having worked with people and talked them through the methodology and done a lot of role play activity with them, it becomes quite straightforward. It doesn't take that long at all. The key is practice and then having the guts to do it the first time. But again, the guts is more easy to come by because you're coming from a place of developmental inquiry. And that's the key. Always come from a place of, you can't bring 400 years of slavery to the table. Again, people won't like me saying that. You can't bring the ills of the colonial empire to the table. You can't bring the ills of systemic racism to the table. You can't bring the suffragette movement to the table. You can't bring the ills of homophobia to the table. You have to come from a pure place of just developmental inquiry. And that makes it easier. That catalyzes the pace at which you can have the confidence, because you've got nothing to worry about because you're just asking an innocent question. So let me answer the other part of the question. Are there any specific advices for not getting caught up in the upset of "I don't understand"? Well, I think I've sort of answered that. And I think it's about, you have to leave the luggage in the lobby, so to speak. Yeah, even if you have every right to bring it, you've got to think about results. So you need to leave the baggage, leave it at the desk, right? Leave it in the lobby and come from a place of developmental inquiry. And that will stop you from caught up in it. And here's the thing, over time, it's not like these happen every day, but when you do, they boom. So over time, if you keep using the approach, what you're going to realize eventually is that you go back to the table, you go back to the lobby, and the luggage will have disappeared because you're in total control in terms of how you deal with it. And it speaks to the leader inside you. So I think the key there is to just try and learn the methodology and then try it. But remember, it's going to be easier for you to have guts to try it because you're coming from an innocent place. of development?
Excellent book.
Great question, Isabel. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Good. Here we go.
Oh, another one.
Here's the second one.
Oh,
what can we do to overcome and recognize our own unconscious bias?
Oh, there's a big. So I think that's a really good question. So I think, I think immersing yourselves in the issue. Now, there's many different types of bias, so it really depends. But if you want to talk from a race perspective, there are a lot of good books out there. A lot of good books. There are many good books out there around defensive fragility. There's a book called White Fragility. There's another one called Why I Don't Want to Talk to White People About Race. There's all these different ones. And, even those titles are scary because they invoke defensive fragility. But they're all about awareness. But my issue with all of them is that none of them, for me, by the way, I've mentioned those ones from a race perspective. There are other ones in relation to homophobia, sexual preference discrimination, ageism, ableism. I think the key is just to immerse yourself in them. I think that's the key. Read one or two books. Immerse yourself in the subject. But I think the key, where a lot of these books are wanting, is that they don't show you how to call it out. And then, so what they do is they say, cut the person some slack. You cut people like this some slack because when they flip out, give them space. Give them space. Reflect on what they say. Think about it. Adapt and change. It sounds like this is a David Attenborough program. You're talking about some like mad, crazy animal. How patronizing is that, right? So instead of, give them something. So I hope that answers Joy Scientist's question. I think immerse yourself in the topic generally, and then, in fact, let me just answer that properly. Immerse yourself in the topic generally, and then look at where you have a propensity to have your bias. And it could be anything. It could be around age. It could be around, a lot of young people. There are a lot of smart young people out there. Smart. Right? And they're smarter than some of the people that they're talking to. But because the person thinks, oh, yeah, you're young, I can't put you in front of a client because you've got your gelled up hair, you're not really make an impact. Then this is a form of bias, right? So I think it's really important that you call it out. So here's a way to call it out. Okay, sorry.
No, it's okay. You just reminded me of something as we're talking, because you keep the questions coming, by the way, there's still time. But and here's another one. But quickly, you've talked about the safe space thing in the past. It really winds you up, doesn't it? You don't like the use of safe space. Am I right? Yeah.
Let me clarify on that, and then I'll come to Isabel's question. Let me just clarify on that. It's not that I don't like safe spaces, and it's not that I think that they're wrong. What I'm wary of is them becoming the default for dealing with issues which can be dealt with if you're equipped to deal with them. But what we mustn't do is come from this guilt-driven space, right? If we come from an equity space, a fairness space, the solutions that we're going to come up with are going to be more around how can we deal with this issue as opposed to how can we help the poor, hapless victim. And the problem is, it's like, there's the guilt drink is like, the guilt Kool-Aid is easy to drink. It's really tempting. It's colorful. And it makes you feel good. But it's got a bitter aftertaste. And the bitter aftertaste is that it leaves you as a hapless victim. So I'd rather just drink water. And to me, water has no enemy. Water is the equivalent of coming from a place of fairness. And I think if you do that, then you're going to equip people with the skills that they need. And then you don't need things like safe spaces. Because let's face it, what does a safe space do? You go to you have a safe space, you tell them all your stuff, right? Then that consultant then goes to the HR, they have a conversation, then you bring the perpetrating manager, they have a conversation with him, maybe there's some mediation done. Then what happens is he's kind of irritated and walking on eggshells. You're kind of paranoid that he thinks of you or she thinks of you differently, and you're back to where you started. Why not just call the thing out? Having said that, sometimes safe spaces are the best, are the right thing and they should be used. Should I go to this question?
Please do, yes. Are there
It
any
says,
examples of bias against you, Buki, that you can remember, where you felt able to separate yourself and call out the bias with dispassionate developmental inquiry?
so that more recently that's happened now, but in the past, this is quite new. So in the past, I wasn't able. So I gave Tendergate as an example, where I was doing the tender. That would have been the perfect place to use this IDU methodology. But I didn't have it at the time. So it was bad for my mental health at the time. But there have been other times when I've been in a situation to call it out, and I have. I remember the other day, last night, I was going to a hotel because I just wanted to inquire about using their services. I went to the hotel. I was, just casually dressed. Went to this 5-star hotel. I knocked on the door, and the way the woman was asking me questions, she seemed to be very wary that something bad was going to happen, right? And this.
Well, he's come to give us some money. I mean,
exactly. That's exactly what I said. So that's what I said. So I said to her, you know what? I really don't. Because she was going, "What's the matter? What's wrong? What?" I'm like, what? "There's nothing wrong." I said, "I actually want to use your services." Right? So I said, "Look, I really don't understand. Actually, look, I'm actually coming here to inquire about using your services, and I can appreciate in the current environment, nobody's using your services at the moment. So I just don't understand why you felt where the hostility came from." Well, and then she said, "Oh no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be hostile. I just didn't know what was going on, and I thought that there was something wrong." And I said, "No, that's fine. I'm actually inquiring about using your meeting room facilities. So I just wanted to know about that. And I just strange that you seem to feel that there was an issue here." And then she realized it called itself out. We got onto the conversation, and then we moved on. That's it. She explained herself. I think in her explaining herself, it called itself out. And then we continued having the conversation. She was cool, I was cool, and who knows, there might be a customer of mine. Yeah. Sorry, but I might be a customer of theirs.
Thank you, Isabel. That's a great question, and that lady would have learned something there, wouldn't she? I mean, you were able to explain that to her in a dispassionate way, and she would have come away from that the richer, wouldn't she? For
exactly
having that explained to her, and she'll certainly think differently about it next time, I would have thought.
Of course, and nobody was hurt, and it was calm. I could have flipped out. Yeah. How dare you? I could have said, "How dare you?" I am wounded, right?
Do you know who I am?
Yeah, exactly. I could have done it. But instead, I just and I think it's the same thing. And I just think it comes with practice. I don't want to look like I'm minimizing the issue or making light of it, but I think we have to have a way of dealing with it. And there's a way of dealing with it in the interpersonal space.
Yeah. Right, Buki. Well, it's time to wind up. It's been absolutely great, man. I've really enjoyed the chat, and as ever, full of insightful perspectives on how we can look at things, and a lot of tremendous energy as well. I mean, in these times of when a lot of people are not feeling particularly, optimistic about things, it's always good to hear your positivity about life and dealing with things. So it's been a great pleasure, and thank you very much for coming on today. And
always a pleasure, John. Always a pleasure. Thank you. Yeah.
We'll speak to you again soon.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks for watching, by the way. Whoever was watching, thank you.
Indeed. And there will be a link posted up, hopefully, on where you can see this on YouTube. If not, we shall endeavour to email you so you can have a copy of this if you want to keep it and pass it on.
Yeah. Remember, come from a place of dispassionate developmental inquiry. If you only take one thing from this.
Exactly. Thank you, Buki.
Thanks a lot.